Got everything all cleaned up here. We got our rebuilt carburetor there. We got our two barrel intake manifold here along with the exhaust manifold. Drilled and tapped all the holes all around this thing, so everything's good. Gonna switch out the factory bolts that they used here with ready rod, and then I'm just going to use some nuts on there, and then this way in the future you can take it apart easily. You won't break those bolts, and that'd be a bad thing if this is in the vehicle and you broke the bolt on there. You don't want that happening, right? Tapped out our holes down there as well. Make sure that we're not going to have any trouble that way. As far as the manifolds themselves, just kind of clean them up. We ground down all basically the casting flash, sharp edges, stuff like that. And I really didn't do anything to the exhaust, but I did gasket match the intakes here. And that was a minimal amount of material just around the very edges. These things are actually cast true, so usually you don't see anything extreme, but we just touched the edges on there, opened it up a little bit. Likely not going to notice the difference in drivability, but since we got it apart, why not, right? Shouldn't be too hard to remove all of this stuff, so we're going to have a series of 1/2-inch nuts along the top, and then underneath you can get with an extension, a deep socket. That extension deep socket will not fit on the top, so you're going to use a combo wrench on the top. Again, you'll probably use a 1/2-inch wrench, disconnect the fuel line there. Got to disconnect our choke mechanism, and then on this side over here we're going to be disconnecting our throttle linkage here. So we'll just disconnect that, and then we've got our 2 bolts for the exhaust, and that's going to be 11/16, and then this is kind of what we're left with here. They're just studs. This whole stud came out the one side, and then the nut came off of the other side there. When we're removing this nut on the very last top bolt there close to the firewall, the whole stud came out of there, and that must be connected to the coolant passage, because then we had antifreeze leaking out that hole, so I just got a catch basin down there to collect it. I don't know how many other top studs are connected to that cooling jacket, so just an FYI, a person might have to drain their antifreeze, collect all the antifreeze and put it back in when they're done doing this job, just as a precaution, I suppose, before you start. Got that assembly taken out of there. We did have a little trouble trying to get that exhaust pipe down off of the stud. You got to get in here, and it's pretty heavy and awkward, so you want to get in close, grab it good, and then I just set it up on top here, and then carried it over to the bench. Some of these bottom ones are hard to get, especially these two here, because they're directly underneath the main body of that exhaust manifold. This one right here is going to be a blind one. You can't see it, you can't get your hands on it, so it's going to be difficult to get that nut on for reassembly. I noticed that the bottom ones were loose, and the top ones were pretty tight, and the manifold says you don't want anything more than 10 foot-pounds, so I don't know if the top ones were over tight and seized and the bottom ones were loose, but we'll just make a note of that for when we put it all back together, that everything's torqued up to the 10 foot-pounds. Here it is on the bench here. There was the stud that was kind of giving us some trouble. We're trying to split that exhaust to lift that out of there. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to put this plate, this is for our throttle cable, gets tightened on there, it gets adjusted and tightened on there, so that's going to have to go on the new one. And also too, this wasn't hooked up, but it's in better shape. It's obviously in better shape than this one here, so we'll put that one on there, and while we put it on, we might as well put a vacuum pump on, see if it actually works or not. We've got a few little things that we got to transfer over to the other setup, and again, as I had mentioned before, so basically this is just a bolt, right? So it's bolted and it goes through here and it threads into there. I'm gonna say probably, 9 times out of 10, this is going to break when you try and undo that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a threaded rod all the way through, and as you can see here, you need something on the bottom for this to be bolted to. So I'm going to put a threaded rod all the way through, and then there'll be a nut on the bottom, and then a nut on the top. Getting a little closer to putting things back together here. So we've got our intake and our exhaust manifolds kind of loosely together here. We've got our vacuum tree in the back. What we did was we changed this. I put a vacuum pump on it. It does work. That's good. We put this bracket here for the throttle cable, and we put our studs in here. And then what I noticed was when I looked at the face of the intake and the exhaust, let's say, you know, that's a little extreme, but let's say that this is sticking out past here. So what I ended up having to do is I drilled out these holes, I drilled out that hole, and I drilled out these two holes here, and then that's going to give us a little more wiggle room to line up. Like these have to be flush when we line it up, and to put our gasket on, line all that up and bolt it together. For now, I'm just going to have the nuts on the top here. It's just going to be loose till we kind of get it into place. And once we've got these bolted down tight all the way along, top and bottom, then it's where it wants to be. Then we'll tighten these ones down. And then the last thing will be to put the carburetor on. Still got a few other little things to put together, like we'll have to transfer our choke mechanism over to the new one here. Another thing is that I'm going to eliminate this pipe. It came out of the back there, and I just grabbed this off another engine, and what it was is it's a plug, and it had some kind of plug pressed in there, but it was all corroded away. So I just got a 5/8, just a piece of metal here. That's just a 5/8 diameter, and then I just welded it on the end, and then there's the bolt, and then it's just going to replace this. It's going to cap that off. I got that off another engine, and we'll put that on there. That's going to bolt in right at the back there. So we'll put that cap that off first. We've got the intake and exhaust manifold all bolted on. We've got our 7/16 bolts on the bottom. That's either going to be a 5/8 or 11/16 head on your bolt, depending on what you have there. And then a 1/2 inch all along the top and the bottom. I believe that there is 7 bolts on the top and 6 on the bottom. Those are 5/16 fine thread on the outside. Don't lose your little keepers here. They're a little triangular kind of keeper. I lost one, and then I had to go rooting around try to find a replacement for it, and they're not necessarily easy to find. So next we're just getting ready to put on the carburetor here. So we've got all this bolted up. We've got our hose to the brake booster, the vacuum tree there. Next would be the carburetor and the choke mechanism, and then we can hook up our throttle cable here. And then hopefully after that, if we've rebuilt the carburetor and set it properly, it should fire right up.